Hello all, very good morning. Thanks for joining the session. Let me share my screen. Hope you are all now able to see my screen, I believe. Yesterday, we have started the demo one on Spring Boot 3.x and microservices architecture. So let me quickly recap what we discussed yesterday. Yesterday, we discussed about what is the course, about the course, and course important, and then the goals, then course content. So as part of the about course, we discussed about the Spring Boot microservices, cloud native microservices, how we can build. Duration is 75 days. Recordings uploaded to your drive, and recordings will be available for the 2 times of your course duration. Then course material will be uploaded to your Google Drive. And the prerequisite for this course is Java 8 and then Spring Core. If you still don't know the Spring Core, don't worry. I'll cover the Spring Core from the very scratch. And in depth of the Spring Core I'll cover. For that, I'll take first 4 weeks. So the fee is 8K INR. And then the timings are from 7 a.m. to 8 a.m. IST during the weekdays, and 7 a.m. to 9 a.m. IST during the weekends. So this is what the about course we discussed. And then the course importance and goals also we discussed. In this course, you will learn Spring Boot 3.x in depth, meaning all the concepts of the Spring Boot 3.x you will learn. And we will implement one project on web application development using the Spring Boot 3.x and then TimeLeaf. So on this project, we will implement all our Spring Boot concepts like transaction management, security, connection pooling, data JPA, logging, and actuators, production grade metrics enable, admin dashboard, everything, all the concepts of the Spring Boot 3.x will implement on top of this web application. So this web application will be implemented with the 3 use cases. I'll explain when time comes. Then though that web application will be converted to the, in that web application, we will also develop the RESTful services. Here I'll discuss about the service-oriented architecture and Spring REST, what is Spring REST and all. And before that, we'll discuss about the REST services guidelines, principles, design, all we discuss, and then we will implement the RESTful services using the Spring REST. Once this is done, then we will see the problems with the architecture of these applications. To solve the problems of the architecture of these applications we implemented, we will go for the microservices architecture. So while moving this application to the microservices architecture, we have to apply the various microservices patterns. So here you will learn the migration strategies of the existing application to the microservices architecture, which is very important. Next, we'll build an ecosystem.
You will migrate from monolithic to microservice?
Correct. That is what. This is what the monolithic, and we'll migrate it to the microservices. That's true. Right. Then we will use the Spring Cloud to make the microservices as a cloud native, meaning microservices ecosystem we will build using the Spring Cloud. And then we'll make that ecosystem as a cloud native using the Docker. So then finally, we will discuss about the interview questions. Of course, every day during the session happening, we'll discuss the interview questions. So end of this course, you will become full stack developer, because we will also integrate these microservices with the React.js. So this also, let me write. So integrate microservices with the React.js. So finally, once after you completed this course and all, you will become the full stack developers. Then in microservices, what I'll cover, and overall what we will cover in this course in the duration of 75 days. Spring Boot 3.x, all the concepts, and microservices architecture, and microservices ecosystem, and securing the microservices, and making the microservices as cloud native. And finally, we will building the projects. So one is web application, call it as monolith, and second one is service oriented architecture, SOA. This is also a monolith, and other is will build the microservices, So these three projects we will do. These three projects we will do in this course. So we will build the web application, which is called as monolithic. So this web application we will build using Spring Boot, Redux, and Timeleaf. And service-oriented architecture we will build using the Spring Boot and Spring REST. Then microservices architecture we will design, and then we will convert the existing application to the microservices application. So these are all what in a nutshell we'll cover during this course. Fine. Now let us jump into the course content. What we will cover in Spring Boot 3.x, what we'll cover in microservices, what we'll cover in Spring Cloud, and what we'll cover in Docker. So let us see that. While covering, we will note down what we required, what are the prerequisites, what are the architectural stack or technical stack that we need to have before starting the Spring Boot. We'll note down. So today's date is 16th May 2023, session demo 2, and then agenda is course content coverage. So this is the agenda. We'll see course content coverage. This is the agenda. So course content of what? Course content of Spring Boot 3.x, course content of microservices, course content of Spring Cloud, and course content of Docker. So these 4 parts we'll try to cover. Give me a moment. Just give me a moment. Yes. So this course content, let us see now. So Spring Boot 3.x course content. This Spring Boot 3.x I divided into 3 parts. So part 1, and then the part 2, part 1, part 2, and then the part 3. Part 1, part 2, and then part 3. 3 parts I divided. In part 1, what we'll discuss, part 2, what we'll discuss, part 3, what we'll discuss, let us see now. Part 1, we'll discuss this entire Spring Boot 3.x I'm talking about. Entire Spring Boot 3.x will take 45 days. So here I told one thing very clear. Spring Core I will cover for 4 weeks, right? Excluding that 4 weeks, Spring Boot and microservices course content will take 75 days, excluding the Spring Core. Don't include that. Okay. Now coming to the course content of the Spring Boot 3.x, first we will see Spring Boot overview. First we will see Spring Boot overview. In order to understand the Spring Boot overview, we require to understand few things first. So in order to understand the Spring Boot overview, by this time, we would have complete with the Spring Core, meaning we would have complete the how Spring Core container will works. So that basic understand would have done by this time. And here we need to understand one more is convention over configuration. So at the time of this overview, what are the prerequisites that we would have covered is, first thing is convention over configuration coding. So before understanding this, we need to understand few things. What is software paradigm versus pattern? Paradigm versus pattern. So paradigm versus pattern. So this first we need to understand. And then we need to understand a paradigm, convention over configuration. Then we need to understand software design paradigm versus principle versus pattern. By this time, we need to understand the principle called DI, dependency inversion. One moment. Okay. So we need to understand dependency inversion. So we need to, of course, you will understand. We will discuss a lot about this in our IOC, meaning Spring Core. Then we need to understand the pattern inversion of control, IOC. So these things we need to understand before we come to the Spring Boot overview. And before we start the Spring Boot, everybody should have to understand these concepts. Okay, fine. So once we understood, then we came to understanding the Spring Boot overview. As part of the Spring Boot overview, so we will see what is Spring Boot and how what is the motivation for Spring Boot evolution when it started, what are the different versions released, what is the current version. And based on what principles, what architectural design paradigm, what design pattern the Spring Boot reader text will works, we'll discuss that. But before coming here, this is the prerequisite. Don't worry, I'll cover. When I say prerequisite for the starting of the Spring Boot, I'll take care of it. I'll cover it. You don't need to worry about it. I'll cover it. So these three things we need to cover. And with these three things, we also need to cover one more thing. But when time comes, I'll tell you. Okay. Next, we'll see the features of the Spring Boot. So to understand these features of the Spring Boot, meaning first of all, we'll understand what are the features of the Spring Boot. So to understand the features of the Spring Boot, by this time, we would have complete the Spring WebMVC flow, Spring WebMVC understanding and the flow. Spring WebMVC flow and then Spring WebMVC architecture, components, and workflow understanding. So by this time, before starting these features of Spring Boot understanding, we need to cover the Spring WebMVC architecture, components, and workflow. So we need to understand the Spring WebMVC, at least what is servlet initializer, what is dispatcher servlet, what is context loader listener, what is request object, what is response object, what is controller, right? So here we'll discuss again few patterns, that is model 1 architecture, and we'll discuss about the model 2 architectures, and we'll discuss about the DTO pattern, and we'll discuss about the DTO pattern and then DAO pattern, and we'll discuss about the business delegate patterns, business delegate, and then session facade. Then we'll discuss about the singleton, factory, and builder patterns. So these would have completed before we understanding the features of the Spring Boot. So everybody must and should have to know about this model 1 and then model 2 architectural patterns, model 2 and then model 1, model 2 architectural patterns. So that means everybody should have to know about these design patterns. By this time, everybody should have to understand these design patterns. Model 1, model 2, DTO, DAO, business delegate, session facade, singleton, factory, and builder patterns. So we'll extensively use this during our microservices design or during our Spring Boot discussion, web application development. We'll extensively use these patterns. So everybody should have to know about these patterns and then how this will work by this time before understanding the Spring Boot features.
So normally what happens, Spring MVC Spring Boot provides MVC architecture, right? Model view and controller way can design our application. So
Correct.
these all design patterns you will explain through the code or what?
Through the code only. Through the code, I'll explain everything. Through the code, I'll explain
By example, right?
Correct. That's true. Okay, so Spring Web MVC architecture, components, and workflow understanding we will do. And then we will also understand, in order to understand the Spring Web MVC architecture, we need to understand Model 1, Model 2, DTO, DAO, Business Delegate, Session First Aid, all these patterns we will see. Okay, fine. Then finally, we'll come to understand the features of the Spring Boot. To understand the features of the Spring Boot, what we'll do is we'll create one project using the traditional Spring Web MVC, using the traditional way, meaning using the Spring Web MVC in a traditional way. We'll build one web application and we'll see how much time it will take. And the same web application will build using the Spring Boot and we'll see how much time it will take. So from there, we will derive the features of the Spring Boot. Right. And also to understand the features of the Spring Boot here, we need to understand few things as well. What are those few things? Of course, Spring Core, we might have complete by this time before coming to this Spring Boot features understanding. But here we need to understand bill of materials. Okay, bill of materials pattern. So we need to understand bill of materials pattern, which we called as BOM. Bill of materials pattern.
So what is this one?
I'll explain this later in time. This is one pattern actually. So bill of materials pattern we need to understand. So bill of materials, DTO, DAO, business delegate, and all these patterns we must have to understand before coming to this Spring Boot, features of the Spring Boot. Okay, now we understood. So the prerequisite things, right, to learn this Spring Boot features. Then we'll see the Spring Boot 3.0, which is one major release after Spring Boot 2.7.1. So when Spring Boot 3.0.0 released, what are all the additions were added in the Spring Boot 3.0.0? The features that were included in the Spring Boot 3.0.0, these are all we will discuss here. Then we'll create a Spring Boot project using the command line interface, using the Spring Initializer, using the IntelliJ IDE. But before coming to this, everybody must have to understand about the, I'll do one thing. Everybody should have to know about the Maven. So in Maven, we'll understand the bill of materials pattern. So everybody should have to know about the Maven. In the Maven, everyone should have to know about the Maven plugins, Maven goals, Maven life cycle phases, Maven goals, Maven life cycle phases, and Maven plugin management. So everybody should have to understand these concepts before we gonna start this creating the Spring Boot project concept, meaning we will create the Spring Boot project using the 3 ways: command line interface, using the start.io, and using the IDE, STS or IntelliJ. But before this, everybody should have to know about the Maven and then these concepts. Perfect. Now, Once we create the Spring Boot project, we'll understand the Spring Boot project structure. Meaning, Spring Boot project when we create, we can create the project of type jar and then project of type var. So var, if the project packaging type is var, here we also need to understand packaging types, then artifact, and then we need to understand the repository concept, local repository, and remote repository. So everybody should have to know about this Maven. Okay. So when we create the Spring Boot application, the Spring Boot application we can create as a var, we can create as a jar. Packaging as a jar, packaging as a var. So when the packaging is jar, what is the structure of the application? When the packaging is jar, what is the structure of the application? When the packaging is var, what is the structure of the application? Correct? So when it is a jar, what is the structure? When it is a var, what is the structure? What are all the extra components added in the var packaging type? So those we will understand. But before understanding these concepts, we need to understand about the few things. That is, everybody should have to know about what is, okay, here artifact, and everybody should have to know about executable artifact. The concept of executable, everybody should have to know about this concept, executable artifact. So what is the meaning of executable? How we can, what is artifact and how we can make it as an executable? Simple artifact in the sense, you can see this jar file or this var file, which is generating when we build the application, right? When we build the application, we'll get the either jar file or either var file, right? That is called as an artifact. All the artifacts are not executable. So we need to understand what is executable artifact is. So once we know that concept, then we'll understand the Spring Boot application components. So by this time, everybody should have to be complete this Maven. Complete Maven, everybody should have to be complete. Don't worry, I'll explain the Maven from the very scratch. Okay, so whatever are required, I'll cover it. So I said prerequisite meaning I'll cover here. Okay, just let me make it as here the 6th point. Yeah, these design patterns are, we'll understand as part of this 5th point only, but this is separate, right? So this is separate, 6th point. So in Maven, we'll understand all these things. Perfect. Then let's go one. Yeah, here we will understand once the Spring Boot application created, then we will understand application packaging types. So that we already know, we already will see in the Maven. So application packaging types. So here we'll discuss a little about the application packaging types, var versus jar. And in the case of the Spring Boot application, what was there in the var kind of project and what is the structure in the case of the jar project, right? Then we'll go to Spring Boot application packaging internals, meaning internally how the Spring Boot application packaging will be happens, we'll discuss. So when I say internally, meaning we'll discuss a lot about this one. This jar file is there now. So two kind of jar files we have. So here we need to know about executable and non-executable. Executable and non-executable artifact meaning we should have to be known. So here one is non-executable, another one is executable. So when I say internals, we will discuss. We'll first go to this lightweight one. So in the lightweight, I copied dot original. In the fat, I copied the .jar file. So I'll extract this and then we will see the differences. We'll extract this and then we will see the differences. Here we need to know one more concept as well. What is manifest.mf file and what is manifest.mf file and how to build an artifact as an executable. This is very, very important. So if we complete this Maven stuff before coming to this part, Spring Boot application components understanding part, if we complete this Maven, you will easily understand this. Okay, perfect. Now we will see the internals of it. Then we will see the executable nature of the Spring Boot packaging. By this time, you might have already know what is executable, what is non-executable. So you might have already know the nature, how it will be in case of the executable and then non-executable. So those we will discuss. Right? So executable versus non-executable. As we already will discuss in the Maven. So how in the case of the Spring Boot, how this executable nature of the Spring Boot packaging we'll discuss. Superb. Then once after we discussed this, we'll go for the auto configuration, which is like heart of the Spring Boot application. If anyone not understand this one, there is no point in attending the Spring Boot sessions. That much of importance. Spring Boot is on top of this auto configuration. Here, we need to understand convention over configuration or coding. However, we already will understand here. So, by this time, everybody know about this one. Then to understand the Spring Boot auto configuration, how it will work, everybody should have to be know about factory pattern. So here we already have done that. Factory pattern and one more pattern also. Strategy pattern. Everybody should have to know about the strategy pattern. So we already will learn all those patterns here. Then what next? To understand the Spring Boot auto configuration, we required the conditional annotation. So understanding the conditional annotation working, and before this conditional annotation, we will understand profile annotation introduced in Spring 3.x. Then we'll understand conditional annotation introduced in Spring 4.x. So we'll understand this conditional annotation introduced in 3.x and profile annotation and then the conditional annotations. With one example, we will see. So this is the prerequisite for what? For understanding the auto configuration. Prerequisite for understanding the auto configuration. So for understanding the Spring Boot auto configuration, we have to know about these two annotations and how those will be worked. So Jdbc profile annotation and Jdbc conditional annotation. And also we need to know about the convention over configuration that we already know, right? So if you know these two things, then we will understand very well about this Spring Boot auto configuration, which is heart of the Spring Boot. Then from here, we will see Spring Boot default configurations, how we can override. Like by default, Spring Boot application will run on the port number 8080. So how do we change that port? And by default, Spring Boot doesn't comes with any of the properties. So if you want to override the application name, how we can override? Then Spring Boot by default is coming up with the 3 servers, meaning embedded servers. In that embedded servers, we'll study about the all embedded servers and how they will start. Internals of it we will study. Then we will deploy the Spring Boot application in an external servers, deploying the application in external application servers. External application servers. That is Tomcat and then JBoss. So we'll deploy it in the external application servers. Though we have the Spring Boot embedded Tomcat container, still how we can deploy it on external servers. So to understand this concept, everybody should have to be know about Marvin scopes. Marvin scopes like provided, compile, provided, runtime. So everybody should have to understand about this Marvin scopes. Compile, provided, and runtime. So if we know about these Marvin scopes, then we can understand how this Spring Boot application we can deploy in an external servers. So what is the relation? Yes, relation is there. When we deploy the Spring Boot application in the external application server like Tomcat or JBoss, our embedded Tomcat server should not work. It should not consider. That's the reason the embedded server was added in Spring Boot application with the scope as provided. You can see the scope as provided, not this one. Var project. If you can see the var project, you can see this scope as provided. And we also need to understand here Marvin scopes, that is compile, provided, runtime, and test. Fine. So hope you understood. So what we cover and how we will cover, right? We'll cover all the prerequisites along with the session that is running. Perfect. So we will complete this section. In this section, you will come to know how we can alternate. Here, why I'm giving this topic? Because convention over configuration concept we will discuss, right? So Spring follows its own conventions and it will do the configuration. So if we alter that configuration, what is the impact? If we want to alternate the Spring Boot default opinion, then what we need to do? So that is the reason I added this here. And we will see, we need to understand, everybody need to understand here. One more point is, we need to understand opinionated approach of development. So everybody should have to be understand here. Opinionated approach of development. So everybody should have to be understand this one as well before starting our Spring. Opinionated approach of development. So this opinion, how we can alter, is what is the motto of this section. Fine. So this is important interview question. Okay, done. So this is what the part 1. In fact, the part 2, these two concepts we will see in the part 2. So in part 2, what we will do, these are all we'll discuss tomorrow. So that's all from my side in today's session. Do you have any questions for me? Any
Sir?
questions? Yeah.
Sir, actually, I just joined. I know I didn't miss so much, but the thing is, sir, can we like have a group, WhatsApp group, anything which can set a reminder? Like, I know this is not the right thing to say, but I'm in Canada. My timings are always miscalculated. So can we have a group or anything?
Yeah. We will maintain the Telegram channel. So in that Telegram channel, I'll keep on post the updates, reminders and all. Okay. Yes, we can have the Telegram channel because this is the Spring Boot demo sessions, right? So once the batch is formed, then I will give the Telegram channel link and all. Okay.
Right, sir. Sir, just one last question before before we wind up. Obviously, if others don't have any questions. So the thing is, there is another batch starting an hour before, I think, or an hour later, just for Hibernate. So I hope I don't have to attend that because I guess it's included here, right? Because I just joined. I think I missed that part.
Yeah. So Hibernate, yes, here I'll discuss this Hibernate, but Hibernate dedicated course is different. Here, what I will explain is components of Hibernate and how we can develop the repository layer using Hibernate and basic CRUD operations using Hibernate I'll cover here. And as part of the project, relations will be covered. So what I mean to say, maybe in a single shot, entire Hibernate may not cover here, but while doing the project and while doing the this data JP layer introduction or developing, so it anyhow complete Hibernate will be covered, but we will use, our focus is more on data JPA. So data JPA will uses Hibernate as the ORM vendor. So here I don't much deep dive into this Hibernate, but we will use Hibernate in our project. So what I mean to say is, we'll focus more on data JPA, and data JPA requires the Hibernate Hibernate annotations, Hibernate relations, and Hibernate working, underlying working architecture is Hibernate only. So what I would like to say is Hibernate dedicated continuous course is different than the Hibernate concepts, how we will discuss here are different. So here we'll discuss whatever the required concepts from the Hibernate we'll discuss. Maybe in a dedicated Hibernate course, they'll discuss the Hibernate different versions. Maybe Hibernate 4 concepts, Hibernate 5 concepts, Hibernate 3.x concepts. So they'll discuss in-depth, in-detailing of it. Here we will discuss more in detailing of the data JPA with an insights into the Hibernate architecture, Hibernate components, and using architecture, using components, thread operations, then relations. That's it. But they'll discuss might be more concepts of the Hibernate as well in the dedicated Hibernate course. Got my point? Yeah. Okay.
Yes, sir. That's it, sir. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Any more questions? Considering the fact that you teach Spring Basics for 4 weeks, can we finish syllabus on? No. What I'm saying is, please, everybody should have to understand one thing. What is that, course duration is what? 75 days, isn't it? So 75 days. These 75 days, excluding Spring Core, by excluding the Spring Core, Spring Core itself will take 4 weeks for me. By excluding that Spring Core, I'm saying the 75 days for Spring Boot microservices and then Docker. For Spring Boot microservices, Spring Cloud, and then Docker. It will take 75 days, excluding the Spring Core. Please don't confuse here. Don't include Spring Core. If you include Spring Core, it is impossible to cover the syllabus in 75 days because there is a lot of syllabus, and probably you might now understood lot of prerequisite is there to cover. I don't think all you guys have all this prerequisite or not. I'm not sure. I don't think all you guys have this prerequisite. Maybe few members have, maybe few members may not have, right? So I have to cover all these things. So it won't complete in 75 days if we include the Spring Core duration also. So exclude this, please. Fine. Yeah. So that's it. If anyone know CoreJava completed, that's fine. You can join the Spring Boot because nowadays no one is wasting time in Servlet, JSP, Jdbc. No, that is good practice actually. That's a good ladder to come to learn this Spring Boot. But people are very smart nowadays. Once complete CoreJava, you can come and then learn the Spring Boot because it's not about the technology. It is not about the framework. It is about the architectural style or architectural way, how we are building the applications. But always it will be a good foundation if you come through the way Spring Core first, CoreJava first, Servlet, JSP, Jdbc next, and then Spring framework, and then Hibernate framework, and then Spring. That is perfect ladder, but it will take eight months for you to learn the Spring Boot. By this time, if you directly learn the Spring Boot, you might get job also. So if anyone only knows CoreJava, yes, you guys also can attend this Spring Boot 3.x framework because I'll cover all the prerequisite that is Spring Core, right? During our sessions. Yeah. Not required. That's what I'm saying. Jdbc, Servlets, JSP, forget about all these things. If anyone knows only the CoreJava, if you've done CoreJava, go for the Java 8 features because extensively we will use Java 8 features here. Lot of Java 8 features we'll use. So go and then study the Java 8 features. That's it. Enough. The rest of all the things I'll take care. Okay, so that's all, guys. Thank you so much for for your participation and the interest you have shown and the opportunity given to me to showcase my course content and all. Hopefully see you tomorrow, and tomorrow we will discuss about the important concept, that is part 2. In part 2, using the Spring Boot 3.x, what kind of application we will build and how we will build the application, how we will apply the security, transactions, connection pooling, validations, internationalization, caching, testing. Lot many things will cover here. Don't miss tomorrow's demo. Interesting demo. See you at the same time tomorrow. Thank you so much.
Hello,
And
sir.
then, yeah.
Can we download the videos? I mean, you will upload.
No, videos are not downloadable. See this. Videos are not downloadable, not shareable. But course material is downloadable, and if you want, you can also share. But videos are not downloadable, not shareable. They are just viewable. Videos are viewable, not downloadable.
And so the time is very short. I mean, just course duration into 2 times. Can you please extend this time also? Is it possible?
Yeah, based on the majority, I believe 150 days is okay. Compared to other institutes, we are giving double
Because
time.
there are so many things, right? So
Correct.
yeah.
Correct.
So
So
can
what
you
I'm
please
saying is, if the course will be completed in 75 days, then next 75 days will be the availability. If the course will be completed in 100 days, next 100 days will be the availability. The course will be completed in 125 days, next 125 days will be the availability. So that is what, if required, we'll also increase the availability by 1 more month as well. That's not a problem. But beyond that, we can't give. Like 75 days in the sense, almost 2.5 months. Plus videos access, one more to around 6 months we are providing the videos, isn't it? That is more than enough time, I believe. Okay, right. Thanks a lot, folks. If you don't have any more questions for me, I'll stop my screen share and then see you tomorrow at the same time with the demo 3. Don't miss demo 3. It will be very interesting. I'll draw an architecture and then showcase what we will cover in that, in that demo 3 sessions learning. What we will cover in the project, I'll showcase you with drawing one architecture. It is very interesting. Don't miss tomorrow's sessions. Thanks a lot and see you tomorrow.